Chapter 73. The Promise. It was indeed Morel who had been in a frantic state since the previous evening. With that instinct which only lovers and mothers possess, he had guessed that, following Mademoiselle de Saint-Méran's return and the death of the Marquis, something would happen that affected his love for Valentine. As we shall see, his forebodings had been realized, and it was not mere anxiety that brought him in fear and trembling to the gate by the chestnut trees. However, Valentine had not been warned of his arrival, since this was not the usual time when he came, and pure chance, or, if you prefer, a sympathetic instinct, had brought her to the garden. When she appeared, Morel called her, and she ran to the gate. "You, at this time?" she said. "Yes, my poor friend," Morel replied. "I have come to look for you, bringing bad news." "This is the house of ill fortune," said Valentine. "Tell me, Maximilien, even though our cup of sorrows is more than overflowing." "Dear Valentine," Morel said, trying to master his own feelings and speak calmly, "please listen, because what I have to say is most important. When do they intend for you to marry?" "Maximilien," said Valentine, "I don't want to hide anything from you. They were discussing my marriage this morning, and my grandmother, on whom I had counted as an unfailing support, not only declared herself to be in favour of my marrying Franz d'Épinay, but wants it so much that she is only waiting for his return. The contract will be signed the very next day." The young man gave a painful sigh, and for a long time stared sadly at the girl. "Alas," he said quietly, "it is terrible to hear the woman one loves say calmly, 'The hour of your torment is fixed, it will take place shortly, but no matter, this must be, and I shall not make any objection to it.' Well, since you tell me that they are only waiting for Monsieur d'Épinay to sign the contract, and since you will be his the day after he arrives home, then you will be engaged to Monsieur d'Épinay tomorrow, because he reached Paris this morning." Valentine cried out. "I was with the Count of Monte Cristo an hour ago," Morel continued. "We were talking, he about the sorrow in your house and I about your sorrow, when suddenly a carriage pulled up in the courtyard. Listen, I have never until now believed in premonitions, Valentine, but henceforth I must. At the sound of that carriage I began to tremble. Soon I heard footsteps on the stairs. The echoing steps of the commander did not terrify Don Juan more than those steps terrified me. At length the door opened. Albert de Morcerf was the first to come in, and I was about to doubt my own instincts and decide that I had been mistaken, when another young man approached behind him, and the Count exclaimed, 'Ah, Baron Franz d'Épinay!' I had to summon up all the strength and courage in my heart to contain my feelings. I may have gone pale, I may have shuddered, but I certainly kept a smile on my lips. 5 minutes later, however, I left without hearing a single word of what had been said in that time. I was totally prostrate." "Poor Maximilien," Valentine muttered. "Here I am, Valentine. Now answer me this, as you would answer a man to whom your words are the difference between life and death. What are you going to do?" Valentine lowered her head. She was overwhelmed. "Listen," said Morel. "This is not the first time that you have thought about the situation in which we now find ourselves. It is serious, it is pressing, it is crucial. I do not think this is the moment to give way to sterile misery. That may be enough for those who want to suffer at their ease and have time to drink their own tears. There are people like that, and God will no doubt reward them in heaven for their resignation on earth, but anyone who has the will to fight will not lose precious time, but immediately strike back at that fate which has dealt a blow. Have you the will to fight against ill fortune, Valentine? Tell me, because that is what I have come to ask you." Valentine shuddered and looked at Morel wide-eyed in terror. The idea of standing up to her father, her grandfather, in short, her whole family, had not even occurred to her. "What are you saying, Maximilien?" she asked. "What do you mean by fight? Rather call it a sacrilege. Am I to struggle against my father's orders and the wishes of my dying grandmother? Impossible!" Morel shuffled. "You are too noble a spirit not to understand me, and you do understand me, dear Maximilien, since I have reduced you to silence." "I fight? God forbid! No, I must keep all my strength to struggle against myself and drink my own tears, as you say. As for bringing sorrow to my father and disturbing my grandmother's final hours, never." "You are right," said Morel coolly. "My God, the way you say that," Valentine cried, wounded. "I say it as a man who admires you, mademoiselle." "Mademoiselle!" Valentine cried. "Mademoiselle! Oh, the selfish man! He sees I am in despair and pretends he cannot understand me." "You are mistaken. I understand you perfectly. You do not want to go against Monsieur de Villefort's wishes. You do not want to disobey the Marquise, and tomorrow you will sign the contract binding you to your husband." "But what else can I do, for heaven's sake?" "Don't ask me, mademoiselle. I am a poor judge in this case, and my selfishness would blind me," said Morel, his blank voice and clenched fists indicating his growing exasperation. "What would you have suggested, Morel, if you had found me ready to accept your proposal? Come, tell me. Instead of telling me that I am doing wrong, advise me." "Are you seriously asking me for advice, Valentine?" "Yes, indeed, dear Maximilien. If it is good, I shall take it. You know that I am devoted to you." "Valentine," Morel said, taking away an already loose plank, "give me your hand to show that you forgive me my anger. You understand, my head is reeling, and in the past hour the maddest ideas have been whirling around my head. Oh, if you were not to take my advice." "Which is?" "This, Valentine." The girl raised her eyes to heaven and sighed. "I am free," Maximilien continued. "I am rich enough for the both of us. I swear to you that you will be my wife even before my lips have touched your brow." "You are making me afraid," the girl said. "Come with me," Morel said. "I will take you to my sister, who is worthy of being yours. We shall set off for Algiers, for England or for America, unless you would prefer us to find a place together in the country where we can wait until our friends have overcome your family's objections before we return to Paris." Valentine shook her head. "I was expecting this, Maximilien," she said. "This is a mad scheme, and I should be madder even than you if I were not to stop you immediately with a single word. Impossible, Morel. It is impossible." "So you will follow your fate, whatever it may bring, without even trying to resist?" Morel said, his face clouding over. "Yes, even if it kills me." "Well, Valentine," Maximilien continued, "I can only repeat that you are right. Indeed, I am the madman, and you have proved to me that passion can blind the sanest mind. So thank you. Thank you for reasoning without passion." "Very well. It's agreed, then. Tomorrow you will be irrevocably engaged to Monsieur Franz d'Epinay. Not by that theatrical formality invented for the last act of a comedy which is called signing the contract, but by your own free will." "Once more, Maximilien, you are driving me to despair. Once more you are turning the knife in the wound. What would you do if your sister were to listen to the sort of advice you are giving me?" "Mademoiselle," Morel said with a bitter smile, "I am selfish, and an egoist, as you say, and as such I do not think of what others would do in my position, only of what I intend to do. I think that I have known you for a year, that on the day we met I wagered all my chances of happiness on your love, that the day came when you told me that you loved me, and that from that day forward I have staked all my future on having you. That has been my life. Now I no longer think anything. All I can tell myself is that fate has turned against me, that I expected to win heaven and I have lost it. It happens every day that a gambler loses not only what he has, but also what he does not have. Morel spoke perfectly calmly. Valentine looked at him for a moment with her large, questioning eyes, trying not to let those of Morel look at the storm already raging at the bottom of her heart. "So what will you do?" she asked. "I shall have the honour of bidding you farewell, mademoiselle, asking God, who hears my words and reads what is in my heart, to witness that I wish you a tranquil life, happy and busy enough for it to hold no place for any memory of me." "Oh," Valentine murmured. "Farewell, Valentine, farewell," Morel said, bowing. "Where are you going?" the young woman cried, reaching out her hand through the fence and grasping Maximilien by his jacket, realizing from her own inner turmoil that her lover's calm demeanour must be feigned. "Where are you going?" "I am going to ensure that I bring no further disruption to your family, and to give an example for all honest and devoted men who find themselves in my position to follow." "But before you leave, tell me what you are going to do, Maximilien." The young man smiled sadly. "Speak, speak," Valentine cried. "I beg you, speak." "Has your resolve changed, Valentine?" "It cannot change. Alas, unhappy man, you know it cannot," she said. "Then, Valentine, adieu." Valentine shook the grille with a force that one would have thought beyond her, and, as Morel was leaving, put both hands through the fence and clasped them, twisting them together. "What are you going to do?" she cried. "Where are you going?" "Have no fear," said Maximilien, stopping 3 yards from the gate. "It is not my intention to make another man responsible for the harsh fate that is in store for me. Anyone else might threaten to find Monsieur France, provoke him and fight with him, but all that would be senseless. What has Monsieur France got to do with all this? He saw me this morning for the first time, and has already forgotten that he saw me. He did not even know that I existed when an understanding between your two families decided that you would belong to one another. So I have no quarrel to pick with Monsieur France, I swear it. I shall not blame him." "Whom then? Me?" "You, Valentine. Oh, God forbid. Woman is sacred. The woman one loves is holy." "Yourself, then, you unhappy man? Yourself?" "I am the guilty one, am I not?" said Morel. "Maximilien, come here," said Valentine. "I command it." Maximilien came over, smiling softly. Had it not been for the pallor of his face, one might have thought he was in his normal state. "Listen to me, my dear, beloved Valentine," he said in his low, melodious voice. "People like us, who have never had a thought that would make them blush before others, before their parents, or before God, people like us can read one another's hearts like an open book. I have never been a character in a novel. I am not a melancholy hero. I have no pretensions to be Manfred or Antony. But without words, without oaths and protestations, I entrusted my life to you. You are failing me, and you are right to do what you are doing. I told you so, and I repeat it, but you are failing me, and my life is lost. If you go away from me, Valentine, I shall be alone in the world. My sister is happy with her husband, and her husband is only my brother-in-law. That is to say, a man who is attached to me by social convention alone. Hence, no one on earth has any need of me, and my existence is useless. This is what I shall do. I shall wait until the last second before you are married, because I do not wish to lose even the faintest shadow of one of those unexpected twists of fate that chance sometimes has in store for us. Between now and then, France d'Épinay may die, or just as you are approaching it, a bolt of lightning may strike the altar. To a condemned man, everything is credible, and when his life itself is at stake, miracles may be counted possible events. So, as I say, I shall wait until the final moment, and when my misfortune is certain, without any hope of remedy, I shall write a confidential letter to my brother-in-law, and another to the prefect of police, to inform him of my intention. And in the corner of some wood, beside some ditch, or in the bank of some river, I shall blow out my brains, as surely as I am the son of the most honest man who has ever lived in France. Valentine was seized with a violent trembling. She let go of the fence that she had been holding in both hands. Her arms fell to the sides, and 2 large tears ran down her cheeks. The young man remained standing before her, sombre and resolute. "Oh, for pity's sake, she said, "tell me that you will live." "No, on my honour," Maximilien said. "But what does it matter to you? You will have done your duty, and your conscience will be clear." Valentine fell to her knees, clasping her breaking heart. "Maximilien," she said, "Maximilien, my friend, my brother on earth, my true husband in heaven, I implore you, do as I shall and live with your suffering. Perhaps one day we shall be reunited." "Adieu, Valentine." "My God," Valentine said, raising her 2 hands to heaven with a sublime expression on her face, "witness that I have done everything in my power to remain a dutiful daughter. I have begged, prayed, and implored, but he has not listened to my entreaties, to my prayers or my tears. Well then," she continued, wiping away her tears and recovering her resolve, "I do not wish to die of remorse. I should rather die of shame. You will live, Maximilien, and I shall belong to no one except you. When? At once? Speak, order me. I am ready." Morel, who had again taken a few steps away, came back once more, pale with joy, his heart swelling, and, passing both hands through the fence to Valentine, said, "My dearest friend, you must not speak to me in that way, or else let me die. Why should I owe my possession of you to force, if you love me as I love you? Are you obliging me to live out of humanity and nothing more? In that case I should prefer to die." "In truth," Valentine murmured, "who in the world loves me? He does, who has consoled me in all my happiness. He has, who is the repository of all my hopes, the focus of my distracted eyes, the resting place of my bleeding heart. He is, none but he. Well, now it is you who are right, Maximilien. I shall follow you, leave my father's house, everything." "Oh, how ungrateful I am!" she exclaimed with a sob. "Everything! Even my dear grandfather! I was forgetting him." "No," said Maximilien. "You shall not leave him. It appears, as you said, that Monsieur Noirtier feels some sympathy for me. So, before you leave, tell him everything. His consent will be a sanction for you before God. Then, as soon as we are married, he will come with us. Instead of one child, he will have 2. You told me how he spoke to you and how you answered. Come, Valentine, I shall soon learn this tender language of signs. I swear to you, instead of despair, it is happiness that awaits us. Oh, Maximilien, look what power you have over me. You have almost made me believe what you are saying, and yet it is insane, because I shall bear my father's curse. I know him. His heart is stone. He will never forgive. So, listen to me, Maximilien. If by some trick, by prayer, by an accident, I don't know what, I can delay the marriage, you will wait for me, won't you? I swear that I will, as you have sworn to me that this frightful marriage will never take place, and that, even if you were to be dragged before a magistrate or a priest, that you would say no. I swear it, Maximilien, by all that is most sacred to me in the world, by my mother. Then let us wait, Morel said. Yes, let us wait, Valentine repeated. There are many things that may save unfortunates like ourselves. I am trusting in you, Valentine, Morel said. Everything that you do will be well done, but suppose they disregard your prayers. Suppose your father and Madame de Saint-Marin were to call tomorrow for Monsieur Franz d'Epinay to sign the contract. You have my word, Morel. Instead of signing, I shall come to you and we shall flee. But in the meantime, let's not tempt fate. We must not meet. It is a miracle, a divine gift that no one has yet discovered us. If that were to happen, if anyone knew how we meet, we should no longer have any recourse left. You are right. But then how can I find out? Through the notary, Monsieur Deschamps. Yes, I know him. And from me, because you may be assured that I myself shall write to you. My God, Maximilien, this marriage is as detestable to me as it is to you. Very well. Thank you, my beloved Valentine, Morel continued. So we are agreed. Once I know the day and the hour, I shall hurry here, and you can leap over this wall into my arms. It will be simple. A carriage will be waiting for us at the gate into the field. You will get in it with me, and I shall take you to my sister's. There, incognito if you wish, or ostentatiously if you prefer, emboldened by knowing our own strength and will, we shall not allow ourselves to have our throats cut like lambs, defended only by our sighs. Agreed, said Valentine. And I in turn tell you that whatever you do, Maximilien, will be well done. Oh, are you happy with your wife? She said sadly. My beloved Valentine, it is too little to say no more than yes. Say it even so. Valentine had drawn close to the fence, or rather had put her lips to it, and her words, on her sweet-scented breath, drifted across the lips of Morel, whose mouth was pressed to the other side of the cold and implacable barrier. Goodbye, Valentine said, tearing herself away from this bliss. Goodbye. You will send me a letter? Yes. Thank you, my dear wife. Goodbye. There was the sound of an innocent lost kiss, and Valentine ran off under the linden trees. Morel listened to the fading sounds of her dress rustling among the bushes and her footsteps on the gravel, raised his eyes to heaven with an indescribable smile of thanks to God for allowing him to be so well loved, then left in his turn. He went home and waited for the remainder of the evening and all the following day, but had no word. It was only on the day after that, at around 10 o'clock in the morning, as he was about to set out for Monsieur Deschamps, the notary, that the postman arrived with a little note which he recognised as being from Valentine, even though he had never seen her handwriting. It read as follows: "Tears, entreaties and prayers have all been in vain. Yesterday I spent 2 hours at the church of Saint-Philippe de Roule, and for 2 hours I prayed from the depth of my heart. But God is as indifferent as men. The signing of the marriage contract is to take place this evening at 9 o'clock. I have only one word to give, as I have only one heart, and my word has been given to you, Morel. My heart is yours. This evening, then, at 9:15, at the gate. Your wife, Valentine. P.S. My poor grandmother's state of health gets worse and worse. Yesterday her excitement became delirium, and today the delirium is almost madness. You will love me truly, won't you, Morel, and help me to forget that I abandoned her in this state? I think they are keeping Grandpa Noirtier from learning that the contract will be signed this evening." Morel was not simply content with hearing this from Valentine. He went to the notary, who confirmed that the signing of the contract would take place at 9 o'clock that evening. Then he went to see Monte Cristo, and there he heard the most detailed account. Franz had been to tell the Count of this solemn event, and Madame de Villefort had written to him to apologize for not inviting him, but the death of Monsieur de Saint-Marin and his widow's state of health cast a pall of sadness over the gathering which she could not ask the Count to share, wishing him, on the contrary, every happiness. On the previous day, Franz had been introduced to Madame de Saint-Marin, who had left her bed long enough for the introduction to take place, then immediately returned to it. As one may well imagine, Morel was in a state of agitation that could hardly be expected to escape an eye as perceptive as that of the Count. Monte Cristo was consequently more affectionate towards him than ever, to such a point that 2 or 3 times Maximilien was on the verge of confessing everything to him. But he remembered his formal promise to Valentine, and the secret remained sealed in his heart. 20 times during the day the young man reread Valentine's letter. This was the first time she had written to him, and in such circumstances. Each time he reread it, Maximilien renewed his promise to himself that he would make Valentine happy. A girl who can take such a courageous decision acquires every right. Is there any degree of devotion that she does not deserve from the person for whom she has sacrificed everything? To her lover, she must surely be the first and worthiest object of his devotion, at once the wife and the queen. No soul is vast enough to thank and to love her. Morel kept thinking with unspeakable anxiety of the moment when Valentine would arrive and say, "Here I am, take me." He had prepared everything for the escape. 2 ladders were concealed among the alfalfa grass in the field. A cab, which would take Maximilien himself, was waiting. There would be no servants and no lights, though once round the first corner they would light the lanterns, because it was essential that an excess of precautions should not lead them into the hands of the police. From time to time a shudder passed right through Morel's body. He was thinking of the moment when he would be helping Valentine come down from the top of the wall and would feel this girl, whom he had not touched until then except to squeeze her hand and kiss the tips of her fingers, abandon herself trembling to his arms. However, when the afternoon came and Morel knew that the time was drawing near, he felt a need to be alone. His blood was boiling, and the merest question, even the voice of a friend, would have irritated him. He shut himself up at home and tried to read, but his eyes slipped across the pages without taking anything in, and eventually he tossed the book aside, and, for the second time, set about drawing his plan, his ladders and his field. At last the moment approached. No man truly in love has ever let the hands of a clock go peacefully on their way. Morel tortured his so much that finally they showed 8:30 at 6 o'clock, so he decided that it was time to leave, that 9 o'clock might be the hour appointed for signing the contract, but that in all probability Valentine would not wait for this pointless ceremony. Leaving the Rue Meslay at 8:30 on his clock, Morel went into the field just as 8 o'clock was striking at Saint-Philippe-de-Roule. The horse and cab were hidden behind a little ruined hut in which Morel himself was accustomed to hide. Little by little, night fell, and the trees in the garden merged into deep black clusters. Morel came out of his hiding place, and with beating heart went to look through the hole in the fence. So far there was no one there. 8:30 struck. Half an hour more went by in waiting. Morel walked up and down, then, at increasingly frequent intervals, went over to press his face against the fence. The garden was growing darker and darker, but he looked in vain for the white dress in the blackness, and listened in vain for the footfall on the path. The house, which could be seen through the leaves, remained dark, and there was nothing about it that suggested a house open to celebrate an event as important as the signing of a marriage contract. Morel looked at his watch, which struck 9:15, but almost at once the church clock, which he had heard already 2 or 3 times, corrected the mistake by striking 9:30. This meant he had already been waiting for half an hour beyond the time Valentine herself had appointed. She had said 9 o'clock, before rather than after. This was the worst moment for the young man, on whose heart each second fell like a lead mallet. The slightest rustling of the leaves or whisper of the wind would catch his attention and make the sweat break out on his forehead. When he heard these sounds, shivering, he set up his ladder, and, not to lose any time, put his foot on the bottom rung. While he was caught between these contraries of hope and despair, in the midst of these swellings and contractions of the heart, he heard 10 o'clock strike on the church tower. "It's impossible," Morel muttered in terror, "that the signing of a contract should take so long, unless something out of the ordinary has happened. I've taken everything into account, and worked out how long each part of the ceremony should take. Something is wrong." Now, alternately, he paced feverishly in front of the gate and stopped to press his burning forehead on the icy metal. Had Valentine fainted after the contract? Had she been stopped while trying to flee? These were the only 2 conjectures that occurred to the young man, and each was horrifying. Eventually he fixed on the idea that Valentine's strength had given way during her flight, and she had fallen senseless in the middle of one of the garden paths. "And if that is so," he cried, hurrying to the top of the ladder, "I should lose her, and by my own fault." The demon which had whispered this idea to him would not leave him, buzzing in his ear with that persistence which rapidly ensures that some doubts, by the sole force of reasoning, become certainties. Seeking to penetrate the growing darkness, his eyes thought that they could detect something lying on the path under the trees. Morel even ventured to call, and thought he could hear a faint cry carried back to him on the wind. At length 8:30 also struck. It was impossible for him to contain himself any longer. Anything might have happened. Maximilien's temples were beating violently, and a haze clouded his eyes. He swung his legs over the wall and jumped down on the far side. He was in the Villefort garden. He had just climbed over their wall. He was fully aware of what might be the consequences of such an action, but he had not come this far only to turn back. In a few seconds he had passed the clump of trees and reached a point from which he could see the house. This confirmed one thing that Morel had guessed in trying to peer through the trees, which was that instead of the lights that he expected to see shining from every window, as would be normal on such an important occasion, he could see nothing except a grey pile, still further obscured by the great curtain of darkness cast by a huge cloud crossing in front of the moon. From time to time a single light flickered as it crossed in front of 3 first-floor windows, as if distraught. These 3 windows belonged to the apartment of Madame de Saint-Marin. Another light remained motionless behind some red curtains. These were the curtains of the windows of Madame de Villefort's bedroom. Morel guessed all these things. Often trying to follow Valentine in his thoughts at all times of the day, he had asked her to make him a plan of the house, so that now he knew it without ever having seen it. The young man felt even more appalled by this darkness and silence than he had been by Valentine's absence. Distraught, wild with grief and determined to brave all in order to see Valentine and discover what was wrong, whatever it might be, Morel reached the edge of the trees and was about to start crossing the flower garden, as fast as he could because it was entirely open, when a sound of voices, still quite distant, drifted across to him on the wind. At this noise he stepped backwards into the bushes from which he had already half emerged, and, concealing himself entirely in them, remained there without moving or making a sound, buried in darkness. He was now resolved. If it was Valentine alone, he would whisper to her as she went past. If Valentine was accompanied by someone else, he would at least see her and ensure that no misfortune had befallen her. If they were strangers, he might grasp some words of their conversation and manage to understand this mystery, which so far remained impenetrable. The moon now came out from behind the cloud that had been concealing it, and Morel saw Villefort at the door leading into the garden, followed by a man in black. They came down the steps and began to walk towards where he was hiding. They had only taken a few paces when Morel recognized the man in black as Dr. d'Avrigny. Seeing them approach, he automatically shrank back until he came up against the trunk of a sycamore at the centre of the clump. Here he was obliged to stop. Very shortly afterwards, the sound of the 2 men's footsteps left the gravel. "My dear doctor," the Crown Prosecutor said, "Heaven is definitely looking with disfavour on my house. What a horrible death! What a terrible blow! Do not try to console me. Alas, the wound is too fresh and too deep. Dead. She is dead." The young man burst out in a cold sweat, and his teeth began to chatter. Who then had died in this house which Villefort himself described as accursed? "My dear Monsieur de Villefort," the doctor replied, in tones that only increased the young man's terror, "I have not brought you here to console you. Quite the opposite." "What do you mean?" the Crown Prosecutor asked, appalled. "What I mean is that behind the misfortune that has just befallen you, there may be another, still greater misfortune." "My God," said Villefort, clasping his hands, "what more have you to tell me?" "Are we quite alone, my friend?" "Yes, quite alone. But why these precautions?" "Because I have a dreadful secret to impart to you," the doctor said. "Let's sit down." Villefort fell rather than sat down onto a bench. The doctor remained standing in front of him, one hand resting on his shoulder. Morel, chilled with terror, was clasping one hand to his forehead, while the other was pressed against his heart, for fear that they could hear it beating. "Dead, dead," he repeated, his thoughts echoed by his heart, and he himself felt as though he would die. "Speak, doctor, I am listening," said Villefort. "Strike, I am ready for anything." Madame de Saint-Marin was certainly very old, but she enjoyed excellent health. Morel breathed again for the first time in 10 minutes. "Sorrow killed her," said Villefort. "Yes, doctor, sorrow, after 40 years living with the Marquis. It was not sorrow, my dear Villefort, the doctor said. Sorrow can kill, though such cases are rare, but does not kill in 1 day, in 1 hour, in 10 minutes. Villefort did not answer, merely raising his head, which had been lowered until then, and looking at the doctor with terrified eyes. "Did you stay with her in her last moments?" d'Avrigny asked. "Of course," the Crown Prosecutor answered. "You whispered to me not to go away." "Did you notice the symptoms of the disease to which Madame de Saint-Méran succumbed?" "Certainly I did. Madame de Saint-Méran had 3 successive attacks, a few minutes apart, the intervals becoming shorter and the attacks more serious. When you arrived, Madame de Saint-Méran had already been grasping for breath for some minutes. Then she suffered what I took to be a simple nervous attack. I did not start to become seriously concerned until I saw her rise up in her bed, her limbs and her neck stiffening. At this point I could see from her face that it was more serious than I had believed. When the crisis was over, I tried to catch your eye, but I could not. You were taking her pulse and counting it when the second crisis occurred, before you had turned in my direction. The second seizure was worse than the first, accompanied by the same convulsive movements, while the mouth contracted and turned purple. At the third crisis she expired. I had already recognized tetanus from the first attack, and you confirmed that opinion." "Yes," said the doctor, in front of everybody, "but now we are alone." "What do you have to tell me, doctor?" "That the symptoms of tetanus and poisoning by certain vegetable substances are precisely the same." Monsieur de Villefort leapt to his feet. Then, after standing for a moment in silence, he sat back down on the bench. "My God, doctor," he exclaimed, "have you really considered what you're saying?" Morel did not know if he was awake or dreaming. "Listen," the doctor said. "I know the significance of what I say and the character of the man to whom I have said it." "Are you speaking to the magistrate or to your friend?" Villefort asked. "To my friend, and to him alone at the moment. The similarity between the symptoms of tetanus and those of poisoning by certain extracts of plants are so similar that, if I had to put my hand to what I am telling you, I should be reluctant to do so. So I repeat, I am addressing you as a friend, not as a magistrate. What I have to say to this friend is as follows. For the 3/4 of an hour that it lasted, I studied Madame de Saint-Méran's agony, her convulsions and her death. I am convinced not only that Madame de Saint-Méran died of poisoning, but that I can actually say, what poison killed her. Monsieur! Look, it is all there. Drowsiness, broken by nervous fits, overexcitement of the brain, sluggishness of the vital organs. Madame de Saint-Méran succumbed to a massive dose of brucine or strychnine, which was administered to her, no doubt by chance, perhaps by mistake. Villefort grasped the doctor's hand. "Impossible," he said. "My God, I must be dreaming. I must be dreaming. It is appalling to hear a man like yourself say such things. In heaven's name, doctor, tell me you may be mistaken." "Of course I may, but I think not." "Doctor, spare me. In the last few days so many unheard-of things have been happening to me that I am beginning to believe in the possibility that I may be going mad." "Did anyone apart from me see Madame de Saint-Méran?" "No one." "Were any prescriptions sent out to the chemists that were not shown to me?" "None." "Did Madame de Saint-Méran have any enemies?" "I know of none." "Did anyone have an interest in seeing her dead?" "No, good heavens! My daughter is her sole heir. Valentine alone— Oh, but if I could ever entertain such a thought, I should drive a dagger into my heart to punish it for conceiving the idea. Come, Monsieur d'Avrigny exclaimed in his turn. My dear friend, God forbid that I should accuse anyone. I am only speaking of an accident, you understand, a mistake. But whether accident or mistake, the fact is there, and it whispers to my conscience, so my conscience speaks aloud to you. Make inquiries. Of whom? How? What about? Let's see. Perhaps Barrois, the old servant, made a mistake and gave Madame de Saint-Marin a potion which had been prepared for his master. For my father? Yes. But how could a potion that had been prepared for Monsieur Noirtier poison Madame de Saint-Marin? Quite simply. As you know, in some illnesses, poisons become remedies. Paralysis is one of those. About 3 months ago, after trying everything to restore the power of speech and movement to Monsieur Noirtier, I decided to resort to one final remedy. So, as I say, for the past 3 months I have been treating him with brucine. The last potion that I ordered for him contained 6 centigrams. These 6 centigrams had no effect on Monsieur Noirtier's paralysed organs. He has in any case become accustomed to them by successive doses, but the same 6 centigrams would be enough to kill anyone else but him. But, my dear doctor, there is no direct access from Monsieur Noirtier's apartment to that of Madame de Saint-Marin, and Barrois never used to go into my mother-in-law's. So, even though I know you to be the most skilled and, above all, the most conscientious man in the world, and even though your words are on every occasion a guiding light to me, equal to that of the sun, well, doctor, even so, and despite my belief in you, I must have recourse to the maxim errare humanum est. Listen, Villefort, said the doctor. Is there any of my colleagues in whom you have as much confidence as you do in me? Why do you ask? What are you suggesting? Call him in. I shall tell him what I saw, what I observed, and we shall perform an autopsy. Will you find any traces of poison? No, not of poison, I'm not saying that, but we can establish the exasperation of the nervous system and recognize the obvious and undeniable signs of asphyxia. And tell you, my dear Villefort, if this was caused by negligence, take care for your servants. If by hatred, take care for your enemies. Good Lord, d'Avrigny. Excuse me. What are you suggesting? Villefort answered despondently. If anyone apart from you were to be taken into our confidence, an inquiry would become necessary. An inquiry in my house! Impossible! But, of course, the Crown Prosecutor continued, pulling himself up and looking anxiously at the doctor. Of course, if you want it, if you absolutely insist, I shall have it done. Indeed, it may be my duty to pursue the matter. My character demands it. But you see me already overwhelmed with sadness. To start such a scandal in my house after such sorrow, it would kill my wife and daughter, and I, doctor, I... You know, a man does not reach my position. A man cannot be Crown Prosecutor for 25 years without acquiring a fair number of enemies. I have many of them. If this affair were to come out, it would be a triumph that would make them leap for joy and cover me with shame. Forgive me these base thoughts. If you were a priest, I should not dare to say that to you, but you are a man and you know other men. Doctor, tell me, you have not told me anything, have you? My dear Monsieur de Villefort, the doctor replied, shaken, my first duty is one of humanity. I would have saved Madame de Saint-Marin if it had been within the power of science to do so, but she is dead, and my responsibility is to the living. Let us bury this terrible secret in the depth of our hearts. If the eyes of anyone are open to it, I shall allow my silence to be blamed on my ignorance. However, monsieur, keep on looking actively, because this may not be an end to it. And when you find the guilty party, if you find him, I shall say, you are the judge. Do what you will. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Villefort said with inexpressible joy. I shall never have a better friend than you. And as though afraid that Dr. d'Avrigny might change his mind, he got up and led him back towards the house. And even though it is in the middle of a chapter, I think that is where we shall take a break. There is more chapter to come. I called it with the poisoning. Called it. Anyway, see you, Thunder. Hope you have a good film watching time. Yes, that's enjoyable. But yes, let us take a break and go do break related things. Also, hi and bye, Sil. I hope sick times go away. And yeah, sleep well. But yes, we shall be back in about 5 minutes. Bye for now. return with some really nice smelling tea, courtesy of Diana. Ooh, it does smell good. This is. I hope you've all had a nice break. I hope you've all either got tea or gone off to bed or whatever it was that you fancied doing, and I hope you're all doing well. But yeah, this tea has, what does it have in it? Rosehip, anise, raspberry, nettle, licorice, cardamom, the one I can never pronounce. I never know whether it's rooibos, whatever. That, clove, calendula, and safflower petals. So it's a bit of everything. So, yeah, it smells really nice. It's from Genier, as in Jeniea, World of Teas. So yeah, I am enjoying that. It's also quite warm. I mean, the tea is obviously, but you know. But yes, shall we continue? I hope we're all lots of stuff in that. Exactly, it's pretty much everything. It's everything you would want in a tea, and it smells really nice. I'm going to thingy it, whatever the word is, undunk it. The opposite of dunking, whatever that is. It's a little cute little tea pyramids as well. I like them. But yeah, got some drama going on. Got some poisonings. Right, I missed some subs I saw, or a sub. Oh yes, thank you to whoever the anonymous gifter was for gifting Diana a sub. It was very kind of you, and I believe Sil also subbed. You did. Thank you, both of you. Wonderful, wonderful people. It's very much appreciated. Yeah, thank you again. But yes, we shall continue with chapter whatever we were on, 73, I think. They vanished. Morel, as if needing to breathe, put his head out of the arbour so that the moon shone on a face so pale that it might have been taken for that of a ghost. God is protecting me, in an obvious but terrible way, he said. But Valentine, my poor friend, can she withstand so much sorrow? And he looked alternately from the window with the red curtains to the three with the white ones. The light had almost entirely disappeared from the red-curtained window. No doubt Madame de Villefort had just put out her lamp, and only a night-light cast a flicker on the window-panes. But at the far end of the building he saw someone open one of the three windows with the red curtains. A candle on the mantelpiece cast a few rays of pale light outside, and a shadow came and leant over the balcony. Morel shuddered. He thought he had heard a sob. It was not surprising that this soul, usually so strong and resolute, now tossed alternately up and down between the two most powerful of human passions, love and fear, should have been weakened to the point where he had begun to have hallucinations. Although it was impossible for Valentine to see him where he was hiding, he thought he saw the shadow in the window motion to him. His troubled mind told him, and his warm heart repeated this to him. This double error became a compelling reality, and with one of those incomprehensible impulses of youth, he leapt from his hiding-place at the risk of being seen, or of terrifying Valentine and raising the alarm, were she to give an involuntary cry. In 2 bounds he crossed the flower garden that seemed in the moonlight as broad and white as a lake, and beyond the row of orange trees planted in boxes in front of the house, he reached the steps, ran up them and pushed the door, which opened freely before him. Valentine had not seen him. Her eyes were lifted upwards, following a silver cloud gliding in front of the deep blue sky, its shape like that of a ghost rising to heaven. Her romantic and poetic nature told her it was her grandmother's soul. Meanwhile, Morel had crossed the antechamber and found the banisters. A stair carpet muffled his steps. In any event, he had reached such a degree of exultation that not even the presence of Monsieur de Villefort himself would have frightened him. Should Monsieur de Villefort appear in front of him, he had decided what to do. He would go up to him and confess everything, begging his forgiveness and his approval of the love that bound Morel to his daughter and vice versa. Morel was mad. Fortunately, he did not see anyone. Now, most of all, he found a use for Valentine's descriptions of the internal layout of the house. He arrived safely at the top of the stairs, and, once there, was taking his bearings when a sob, in tones that he recognized, showed him the way. He turned around. A half-open door gave out a shaft of light and the moaning voice. He pushed it and went in. At the bottom of an alcove, under a white sheet covering its head and outlining its shape, lay the corpse, still more terrifying in Morel's eyes now that he had chanced on the secret of her death. Valentine was kneeling beside the bed, her head buried in the cushions of a broad-backed chair, shivering and heaving with sobs, her two hands stiffly joined above her head, which remained invisible. She had come back here from the still open window and was praying aloud in tones that would have melted the hardest heart. The words poured swiftly from her lips, made incoherent by the pain that grasped her throat in its burning embrace. The moon, its light coming in shafts through the blinds, outshone the candle and cast a funereal glow over this scene of desolation. Morel was overcome by it. Though he was neither exceptionally pious nor easy to impress, it was more than he could do to remain silent on seeing Valentine suffer, weep and wring her hands in front of him. He sighed and breathed a name. The head bathed in tears, and like marble against the velvet cushion of the chair, the head of a Mary Magdalene by Correggio was raised and turned towards him. Valentine gave no sigh of astonishment on seeing him there. No halfway emotions can exist in a heart swollen with utmost despair. Morel offered her his hand. To excuse herself for not coming to meet him, Valentine showed him the body lying under its shroud, and once more began to sob. Neither one of them dared to speak in this room, and each was reluctant to break a silence that seemed to have been ordered by some figure of death standing in a corner with a finger to its lips. Valentine at length was the first to speak. "My friend," she said, "what are you doing here? Alas, I should say welcome to you if it were not that death had opened the doors of this house to you." "Valentine," Morel said in a trembling voice, his hands clasped. "I have been here since 8:30. Not seeing you come, I was overwhelmed with anxiety, so I leapt over the wall and entered the garden. Then I heard voices talking about the terrible occurrence." "What voices?" Valentine asked. Morel shuddered, suddenly remembering the whole conversation between the doctor and Monsieur de Villefort, and through the winding sheet thought he could see those twisted arms, convulsed neck, and violet lips. "The servants' voices told me everything," he said. "But we are lost now that you have come here," Valentine said, with neither anger nor fear. "Forgive me," Morel replied in the same tones. "I shall leave." "No," said Valentine. "They will see you. Stay." "Suppose someone comes?" She shook her head. "No one will come," she said. "Have no fear. This is our safeguard." And she pointed to the shape of the body under its shroud. "But what happened to Monsieur d'Épinay? Tell me, I beg you." "He arrived to sign the contract at the very moment when my dear grandmother was breathing her last." "Alas!" Morel exclaimed with a feeling of egoistic joy, thinking in himself that this death would indefinitely delay Valentine's marriage. "But what increases my sorrow," the young woman went on, as if his feeling were destined for instant punishment, "is that my poor grandmother, as she died, ordered the marriage to be concluded as soon as possible. My God, even she, thinking she was protecting me, acted against my interest." "Listen," Morel exclaimed. The two young people fell silent. They could hear a door opening and footsteps along the floor in the corridor and on the staircase. "It's my father coming out of his study," Valentine said. "And showing the doctor out," said Morel. "How do you know it's the doctor?" she asked in astonishment. "I assume it must be," said Morel. Valentine looked at him. Meanwhile, they heard the street door shut. Monsieur de Villefort also went to lock the door to the garden and then came back up the stairs. Reaching the antechamber, he paused for a moment, as though hesitating between his own room and that of Madame de Saint-Marin. Morel hastily hid behind a door. Valentine did not move. It was as though the depth of her sorrow had put her beyond the reach of ordinary fears. Monsieur de Villefort went into his room. "Now," said Valentine, "you cannot leave either through the garden door or through that leading into the street." Morel looked at her in astonishment. "Now," she continued, "there is only one safe way out remaining, which is through my grandfather's apartments." She got up. "Follow me," she said. "Where?" Maximilien asked. "To my grandfather's." "Me? To Monsieur Noirtier's?" "Yes." "How can you think of such a thing, Valentine?" "I have been thinking of it for a long time. He is my only friend in the world, and we both need him. Come." "Careful, Valentine," Morel said, reluctant to do as she said. "Take care. The scales have fallen from my eyes, and I can see that I was mad to come here. Are you sure that you are acting altogether sensibly, my dearest?" "Yes," Valentine said. "I have no misgivings, except that I must leave the mortal remains of my grandmother alone when I promised to guard them." "Death is sacred in itself, Valentine." "Yes, and in any case I shall not be away long. Come." She crossed the corridor and went down a little staircase that led to Noirtier's. Morel followed her on tiptoe. As they reached the landing outside Noirtier's rooms, they met the old servant. "Barrois," Valentine said, "shut the door and let no one come in." And she led the way. Noirtier, still sitting up in his chair and alert to the slightest noise, knowing everything that went on through his servant, was looking eagerly towards the bedroom door. He saw Valentine and his eyes lit up. But the old man was struck by something grave and solemn in the young woman's approach and manner, and, while continuing to shine, his eye also looked questioningly at her. "Dear grandfather," she said briefly, "listen carefully to what I have to say. You know that Grandmother Saint-Marin died an hour ago, and now, apart from yourself, I have no one left who loves me in the world." An expression of infinite tenderness passed across the old man's eyes. "So if I have any sorrows or any hopes, I must confide them to you alone." The invalid answered, "Yes." Valentine took Maximilien's hand. "Well then," she said, "look at this gentleman." The old man turned an inquiring and mildly astonished look on Morel. "This is Monsieur Maximilien Morel," she continued, "the son of the honest businessman in Marseille, whom you have no doubt heard of." "Yes," the old man indicated. "His is a name beyond reproach, And Maximilien is in process of making it glorious, for at the age of only 30 he is a captain of Spahi and an officer of the Legion of Honour. The old man indicated that he recalled Morel. "Well then, grandfather," said Valentine, kneeling in front of the old man and indicating Morel with one hand, "I love him, and I shall belong to no one else. If I am forced to marry another, I shall let myself die or kill myself." The invalid's eyes expressed the tumult of ideas in his head. Excuse me. "You love Monsieur Maximilien Morel, don't you, grandfather?" the young woman asked. "Yes," the old man answered, motionless. "And can you protect us, who are also your children, against my father's will?" Nortier turned his intelligent look towards Morel, as if to say, "That depends." Maximilien understood. Mademoiselle, he said, "you have a sacred duty to perform in your grandmother's room. Would you permit me to have the honour of speaking to Monsieur Nortier for a moment?" Yes, that's right," said the old man's eyes. Then he looked anxiously at Valentine. "Do you mean, how will he understand you, grandfather?" "Yes." "Oh, don't worry. We have so often spoken about you that he knows very well how I communicate with you." Then, turning to Maximilien with a charming smile, though one clouded with inexpressible sadness, she said, "He knows everything that I do." She got to her feet, drew up a seat for Morel, and instructed Barrois not to let anyone in. Then, after tenderly embracing her grandfather and sadly saying farewell to Morel, she left. As soon as she had gone, Morel, to prove to Nortier that he had Valentine's confidence and knew all their secrets, took the dictionary, the pen and paper, and put all of them on a table with a lamp. "But first, monsieur," he said, "please let me tell you who I am, that I love Mademoiselle Valentine and my intentions towards her." "I am listening," Nortier indicated. He made an imposing sight, this old man, in appearance a useless burden, yet who had become the one protector, the sole support and the only judge of two young, handsome, strong lovers on the threshold of life. His face, with its extraordinary nobility and austerity, intimidated Morel, whose voice trembled as he started to speak. He described how he had met and come to love Valentine, and how Valentine in her loneliness and unhappiness had accepted the offer of his devotion. He described his birth, position, and fortune. More than once, when he looked questioningly at the old man, the latter looked back with the reply, "Very well, continue." "Now," Morel said when he had finished the first part of his story, "having told you about my love and my hopes, monsieur, should I tell you what we intend to do?" "Yes," said the invalid. "Very well. This is what we have resolved." So he described everything to Nortier, how a cab was waiting near the field, how he meant to elope with Valentine, take her to his sister's, marry her, and, after waiting for a respectable period, hoped that Monsieur de Villefort would pardon him. "No," said Nortier. "No?" Morel replied. "This is not what we should do?" "No." "So the plan does not have your approval?" "No." "Well, there is another way," said Morel. The old man's eyes looked at him, asking, "What way?" "I shall go and find Monsieur Franz d'Épinay. I am pleased to be able to tell you this in the absence of Mademoiselle de Villefort, and I shall behave towards him in such a way as to oblige him to behave as a gentleman." Nortier's look was still questioning. "You want to know what I shall do?" "Yes." "This. As I said, I shall go and speak to him and tell him the ties that unite me to Mademoiselle Valentine. If he is a man of feeling, he will prove it by himself renouncing his claim to his fiancée's hand, and from that moment until his death he will be assured of my friendship and devotion. If he refuses, either out of greed or because of some stupid considerations of pride, after proving to him that he would be forcing himself on my wife, that Valentine loves me and cannot love anyone else, I shall fight with him, giving him every advantage. I shall then kill him, or he will kill me. In the former case, he will not marry Valentine. In the latter, I shall be certain that Valentine will not marry him. Noirtier gazed with unspeakable pleasure on this noble and sincere countenance, on which were illustrated all the feelings that his tongue expressed, the look on his handsome face adding all that colour can add to a firm and accurate drawing. Yet when Morel had finished speaking, Noirtier closed his eyes several times, which, as we know, was his way of saying no. "No?" said Morel. "Do you disapprove of this second plan as you did the first?" "Yes, I disapprove," the old man replied. "So, monsieur, what can I do?" Morel asked. "Madame de Saint-Marin's last words were to hasten her granddaughter's marriage. Should I let things take their course?" Noirtier remained motionless. "Yes, I understand," said Morel. "I must wait." "Yes." "But any delay may be fatal, monsieur. Alone, Valentine is powerless, and she will be forced to submit like a child. Having miraculously entered this house to find out what was happening, and miraculously finding myself in your presence, I cannot reasonably expect such good fortune to recur. Believe me, and forgive this youthful vanity on my part, but only one or other of the courses that I have suggested can work. Tell me which you prefer. Do you authorize Mademoiselle Valentine to entrust herself to my honour?" "No." "Would you prefer me to go and speak to Monsieur d'Épinay?" "No." "But for heaven's sake, who will give us the help that we are praying for?" The old man's eyes smiled, as usual when heaven and prayer were mentioned. The old Jacobin had retained some of his atheistic ideas. "From chance?" said Morel. "No." "From you, then?" "Yes." "From you?" "Yes," the old man repeated. "You do understand what I'm asking, monsieur. Forgive my asking you yet again, but my life depends on your reply. Will our salvation come from you?" "Yes." "Are you sure?" "Yes." "Do you promise it?" "Yes." There was such strength in the look that gave this affirmative reply that it was impossible to doubt the man's will, even if one might doubt his power to carry it out. "Oh, thank you, monsieur. Thank you 100 times. But unless a divine miracle restores your power of speech and movement, how can you, chained to that chair, dumb and motionless, how can you oppose the marriage?" The old man's face lit up with a smile. It is a strange thing, a smile in the eyes of an unmoving face. "So I must wait?" the young man asked. "Yes." "And the contract?" The same smile reappeared. "Are you telling me that it will not be signed?" "Yes," said Noirtier. "So not even the contract will be signed?" Morel exclaimed. "Forgive me, monsieur. One may be forgiven for doubting such happiness. The contract will not be signed?" "No," said the invalid. Despite this assurance, Morel was reluctant to believe. Such a promise from a powerless old man was so strange that, instead of emanating from a powerful will, it might indicate a weakening of the faculties. Is it not normal for a madman who does not know his own folly to claim that he can accomplish things that are beyond his power. A weak one speaks of the weights he can lift, a timorous one of the giants he can confront, the poor of the treasures he possesses, and the most humble peasant, on account of his pride, is called Jupiter. Whether it was that Noirtier understood the young man's uncertainties, or that he did not completely trust in the docility that he had shown, he stared hard at him. "What do you want, monsieur?" Morel asked. "That I should repeat my promise to do nothing?" Noirtier's look remained fixed and firm, as if to say that a promise was not enough. Then it was lowered from Morel's face to his hand. "You want me to swear?" Maximilien asked. "Yes," the invalid replied with the same solemnity. "I do." Morel understood that the old man attached a great deal of importance to this oath. He held out his hand. "On my honour," he said, "I swear to you that I shall await your decision before I do anything against Monsieur d'Épinay." "Very good," said the old man's eyes. "Now, monsieur," Morel asked, "do you wish me to leave?" "Yes." "Without seeing Mademoiselle Valentine?" "Yes." Morel indicated that he was ready to obey. "But first, monsieur," he said, "will you allow your son to embrace you as your daughter did a moment ago?" There was no mistaking the expression in Noirtier's eyes. The young man put his lips on the old man's forehead at the very same place where the young woman had put hers. Then he bowed once more and went out. Outside, in the hall, he found the old servant, who had been told by Valentine to wait for him. He guided him down a dark, winding corridor to a little door leading into the garden. Once there, Morel went back to the gate past the arbour and, in a moment, was on top of the wall. A second later, thanks to his ladder, he was in the alfalfa field, where the cab was still waiting for him. He got in, and exhausted by all the day's emotions but lighter in heart, he got home to the Rue Meslay at around midnight, threw himself on his bed, and slept as deeply as though he were blind drunk. Chapter 74. The Villefort family vault. 2 days later, a considerable throng gathered at around 10 in the morning at Monsieur de Villefort's door, and watched a long line of funeral carriages and private coaches extending the whole length of the Faubourg Saint-Honoré and the Rue de la Pépinière. Among them there was one of peculiar shape, which seemed to have travelled a long way. It was a sort of wagon, painted black, which had been one of the first to arrive for this sad appointment. On inquiry, it had been learnt that, by a strange coincidence, this carriage contained the body of Monsieur de Saint-Marin, so those who had come for a single funeral would find themselves following 2 bodies. Their number was considerable. The Marquis de Saint-Marin, one of the most zealous and faithful dignitaries in the courts of King Louis XVII and King Charles X, had kept a good number of friends, and these, together with people who were socially acquainted with Villefort, made up a large crowd. The authorities were immediately informed, and it was agreed that the 2 processions could take place at once. A second hearse, decked out with the same funereal trimmings as the first, was brought to Monsieur de Villefort's door, and the coffin transferred to this funeral car from the wagon in which it had travelled. The 2 bodies were to be buried in the cemetery of Père Lachaise, where Monsieur de Villefort had long ago inaugurated the vault ultimately intended for his whole family. Already, poor Renée's body had been laid to rest there, 10 years later to be joined by those of her father and mother. Paris, always curious and fascinated by the spectacle of a funeral, watched in solemn silence the passing of this magnificent procession, which bore to their last resting place 2 names of that old aristocracy who more than any others was celebrated for their traditional spirit, reliability in their dealings, and obstinate devotion to principle. Beauchamp, Albert, and Chateau Renard were in the same funerary carriage, discussing this almost sudden death. "I saw Madame de Saint-Marin only last year in Marseille," said Chateau Renard, "on my way back from Algeria. She was a woman fated to live to 100, thanks to her excellent health, sound mind, and undiminished energy. How old was she?" 66, Albert replied. "At least so France assures me. It was not old age that killed her, though, but grief at the death of the Marquis. It appears that she was completely shattered by his death and never really recovered her wits." "Even so, what did she die of?" asked Beauchamp. "A stroke, apparently, or an apoplexy. It's the same thing, isn't it?" "More or less." "Apoplexy?" said Beauchamp. "Now that's hard to believe. I too saw Madame de Saint-Marin a couple of times. She was petite, slightly built, and much more of a nervous than a sanguine temperament. It's very rare for grief to produce apoplexy in a person of Madame de Saint-Marin's constitution." "In any event," said Albert, "whatever the illness or the doctor who killed her, this means that Monsieur de Villefort, or rather Mademoiselle Valentine, or again rather our friend Franz, can enjoy a splendid inheritance, an income of 80,000 livres, isn't it? What's more, it'll be almost doubled when that old Jacobin Noirtier dies." "Now there's a tenacious old bird," said Beauchamp. "Tenacem proposti verum. I do believe he has wagered with death that he will bury all his heirs, and by heaven he'll do it. He really is the old conventionel of 93, who told Napoleon in 1814, 'You are going down because this empire of yours is a young shoot exhausted by its own growth. Take the Republic as your guide. Let's go back to the battlefield with a good constitution, and I promise you 500,000 soldiers, another Marengo, and a second Austerlitz. Ideas never die, sire, and though they may slumber for a time, they wake up stronger than when they fell asleep.'" "It appears that for him men are like ideas," said Albert. "There's only one thing bothering me, which is how Franz d'Epinay will get on with a grandfather-in-law who cannot do without Franz's wife. By the way, where is Franz?" "In the front carriage with Monsieur de Villefort, who already considers him one of the family." More or less similar conversations were taking place in each of the carriages in the funeral procession. People were amazed at these two deaths, so sudden and so close together, but no one suspected the terrible secret which Monsieur d'Avrigny had revealed to Monsieur de Villefort in their midnight walk. After a drive of about an hour, they reached the cemetery gates. The weather was calm but overcast, and so quite appropriate for the dismal ceremony that they had come to perform. Among the groups going towards the family vault, Chateau Renard recognized Morel, who had come alone and in a cab. He was walking by himself, very pale and silent, along the little path lined with yews. "You here?" Chateau Renard said, slipping his arm into the captain's. "Do you know Monsieur de Villefort, then? And in that case, how is it that I have never seen you in his house?" "It's not that I know Monsieur de Villefort, but that I knew Madame de Saint-Marin," said Morel. At that moment Albert joined them with Franz. "Here's not a good place to make introductions," said Albert, "but who cares? We're not superstitious, are we? Monsieur Morel, let me introduce Monsieur Franz d'Epinay, a splendid travelling companion with whom I toured Italy. My dear Franz, Monsieur Maximilien Morel, an excellent friend whom I have acquired in your absence, and whose name you will hear coming up in the conversation every time I want to speak of heart, spirit, and pleasant companionship." Morel hesitated for a moment. He wondered if it was not disgraceful hypocrisy to address an almost friendly greeting to a man whose interests he was secretly undermining, but he recalled his oath and the solemnity of the occasion, and made an effort to let nothing appear on his face. He contained himself and bowed. Mademoiselle de Villefort appears to be very sad, Debray said to France. Yes, said France, so much indeed that her sadness is inexplicable. This morning she was so overcome that I could hardly recognize her. These apparently simple words broke Morel's heart. Had this man seen Valentine? Had he spoken to her? The ardent young officer needed all his strength to resist the desire to break his vow. Instead, he took Château-Renard's arm and led him quickly towards the vault, in front of which the undertakers had just put down the 2 coffins. "Fine dwelling," said Bouchon, glancing at the mausoleum. "Summer palace, winter palace. You'll live there yourself in the end, my dear d'Épinay, as you're soon going to be one of the family. As for me, philosopher that I am, I should like a little country house, a cottage far away under the trees, with less hewn stone on my poor corpse. When I die, I shall say to those about my deathbed what Voltaire wrote to Piron, Eo Rus, and that'll be it." "Damn it, Franz, cheer up. Your wife's an heiress." "I must say, Beauchamp," said Franz, "you are impossible. Politics have accustomed you to laugh at everything, and men who administer affairs usually don't believe in anything. But I must ask you, Beauchamp, when you have the honour to find yourself in the company of ordinary men and the good fortune to be out of politics for a moment, please try to pick up the heart that you leave behind at the cloakroom of the lower and upper house." "By God," said Beauchamp, "what is life except a pause in the antechamber of death?" "Beauchamp's getting on my nerves," Albert said, dropping behind 4 paces with France and leaving Beauchamp to continue his philosophical discussion with Debray. The Villefort family vault consisted of a square of white stones, rising to a height of about 20 feet. An inner wall divided the families of Saint-Marin and Villefort into 2 compartments, each with its own entrance. Inside, there were none of those base drawers, one above the other, as in other tombs, which allow the dead to be packed in economically with an inscription like a label on each one. All that one could see at first through the bronze door was an austere, dark antechamber, separated from the tomb itself by a wall. It was in the middle of this wall that the 2 doors we mentioned were set, giving entrance to the Villefort and Saint-Marin family sepulchres. Here sorrow could have free rein without the silent contemplation or tearful prayers of the visitor to the tomb being disturbed by the songs, shouts, or gallivanting of those merry passers-by who make a visit to the Père Lachaise, into a picnic or a lovers' meeting. The 2 coffins were taken into the right-hand vault, which was that of the Saint-Marin family. They were placed on trestles that had been prepared in advance to receive these mortal remains. Only Villefort, France, and a few close relatives entered the sanctuary. Since the religious ceremony had been carried out at the door, and there were no speeches to be made, the mourners dispersed immediately. Château-Renard, Albert, and Morel going off in one direction, Debray and Beauchamp in another. France remained at the gate of the cemetery with Monsieur de Villefort. Morel stopped on the first excuse and saw the 2 of them leaving in one of the funerary carriages. He found this tête-à-tête ominous. Then he returned to Paris, and, though he was in the same carriage as Château-Renard and Albert, did not hear a word of what the 2 young men said. In fact, as Franz had been about to take his leave of Monsieur de Villefort, the latter had asked, "Tell me, Baron, when shall I see you again?" "When you wish, monsieur," Franz replied. "As soon as possible." "I am at your disposal. Do you wish us to return together?" "If it does not inconvenience you." "Not at all." This was why the future father-in-law and future son-in-law got into the same carriage, and Morel, seeing them go by, was rightly disturbed. So Villefort and Franz returned to the Faubourg Saint-Honoré together. The Crown Prosecutor, without going to see anyone or speaking to his wife and daughter, showed the young man into his study, and motioning him to a chair, said, "Monsieur d'Épinay, I must remind you, and this is not such an inappropriate moment as it seems, because obedience to the dead is the first offering that one should place on their tombs. I must remind you of the wish that Madame de Saint-Marin expressed 2 days ago on her deathbed, namely that Valentine's marriage should not be delayed. You know that the affairs of the deceased are entirely in order, and that her will bequeaths to Valentine the entire fortune of the Saint-Marins. The notary showed me yesterday the documents that will allow us to draw up a definitive contract of marriage. You can see him and ask him on my behalf to show you these papers. His name is Monsieur Deschamps, Place Beauvau, Faubourg Saint-Honoré." "Monsieur," d'Épinay replied, "this may not be the moment for Mademoiselle Valentine, plunged as she is in grief and mourning, to think about getting married. In fact, I would be afraid that—" Monsieur de Villefort interrupted him. "Valentine," he said, "will have no more urgent desire than to fulfill her grandmother's last wishes. I guarantee there will be no objection from that side." "In that case, monsieur," Franz replied, "as there will be none from mine, you can go ahead at your own convenience. I have given my word, and I shall keep it not only with pleasure but also with happiness." "Then nothing is stopping us. The contract was to have been signed 3 days ago, so we shall find it completely drawn up. We can sign it this very day." "But what about the period of mourning?" asked Franz. "Don't worry," said Villefort. "You will not find that in this house convention is disregarded. Mademoiselle de Villefort can retire for the appropriate 3 months into her estate at Saint-Marin. I say her estate because from now it belongs to her. There, in a week, if you wish, quietly and with a minimum of ceremony, we can conduct the civil wedding. It was Madame de Saint-Marin's desire that her granddaughter should be married on the estate. Once the marriage has been concluded, monsieur, you can return to Paris, and your wife will spend the period of mourning with her stepmother." "As you wish, monsieur," said Franz. "Very well, then," Villefort continued. "Please be good enough to wait for half an hour. Valentine will come down to the drawing-room. I shall send for Monsieur Deschamps. We can read and sign the contract on the spot, and this evening Madame de Villefort will take Valentine down to her estate, where we shall go and join them in a week's time." "Monsieur," said Franz, "I have only one thing to ask you." "What is that?" "I should like Albert de Morcerf and Raoul de Château-Renard to be present at the signature of the contract. As you know, they are my witnesses." "Half an hour will be enough to inform them. Would you like to go for them yourself, or would you prefer me to have them sent for?" "I would rather go myself, monsieur." "So I shall expect you in half an hour, Baron, and in half an hour Valentine will be ready." Franz bowed and left the room. Hardly had the street door closed behind him than Villefort sent one of the servants to ask Valentine to come down to the drawing-room in half an hour, because they were expecting the notary and Monsieur d'Épinay's witnesses. This unexpected news produced a great commotion in the house. Madame de Villefort refused to believe it, and Valentine was struck down as if by a bolt of lightning. She looked frantically around her as if searching for someone whom she could beg for help. She tried to go down to find her grandfather, but on the stairs she met Monsieur de Villefort, who took her arm and led her into the drawing-room. In the antechamber she passed Barrois and gave the old servant a look of desperation. A moment after Valentine, Madame de Villefort entered the drawing-room with little Edouard. It was clear that the woman had been affected by the family misfortunes. She was pale and seemed desperately tired. She sat down and took Edouard on her knees, occasionally hugging this child convulsively to her breast. He seemed to have become the centre of her entire life. Soon they heard the sound of 2 carriages entering the courtyard. One belonged to the notary, the other to Franz and his friends. In a moment they were all gathered in the drawing-room. Valentine was so pale that one could see the blue veins from her temples standing out around her eyes and running the length of her cheeks. Franz, too, was overcome with powerful feelings. As for Chateau Renard and Albert, they looked at one another with astonishment. The ceremony that had just finished did not seem to them to have been sadder than the one that was about to begin. Madame de Villefort was in shadow, behind a velvet curtain, and since she was constantly bent over her son, it was hard to tell what was going on in her mind. Monsieur de Villefort, as always, was impassive. The notary set out the papers with a lawyer's habitual precision, sat down on his chair, raised his glasses, and then turned to Franz. "Are you Monsieur Franz de Quesnel, Baron d'Épinay?" he asked, perfectly aware of the answer. "I am." The notary bowed. "I must inform you, monsieur," he said, "as I am requested to do by Monsieur de Villefort, that your intended marriage with Mademoiselle de Villefort has altered the terms of Monsieur Noirtier's will towards his granddaughter, and that he is withdrawing entirely the fortune that he intended to bequeath to her. Let me at once add," the notary continued, "that the testator has the right to alienate only a portion of his wealth, and since he has withdrawn all of it, the will can successfully be contested, whereupon it will be declared null and void." "Yes," said Villefort, "though I must warn Monsieur d'Épinay in advance that my father's will is not to be contested in my lifetime, since my position does not allow me to suffer even the hint of a scandal." "Monsieur," said Franz, "I regret that it has been found necessary to raise such a question in front of Mademoiselle Valentine. I have never tried to discover the amount of her fortune, which, even reduced, will be much larger than mine. What my family sought in my marriage to Monsieur de Villefort's family was rank. What I am seeking is happiness." Valentine made a barely perceptible sign of thanks, while 2 silent tears ran down her cheeks. "In any event, monsieur," Villefort said to his future son-in-law, "apart from the loss of this portion of your expectations, there is nothing in this unexpected will which is to your discredit. It may be explained by Monsieur Noirtier's weakness of mind. What displeases my father is not that Mademoiselle de Villefort is marrying you, but that she is marrying at all. Her marriage to any other man would have caused him equal displeasure. Old age is selfish, monsieur, and Mademoiselle de Villefort was a devoted companion to Monsieur Noirtier in a way that the Baroness d'Épinay can no longer be. My father's unfortunate state means that people seldom discuss serious matters with him, the feebleness of his wits not allowing him to follow such conversations. I am quite convinced that at the moment, while he is aware that his granddaughter is getting married, Monsieur Noirtier has even forgotten the name of the man who is to become his grandson." Hardly had Monsieur de Villefort spoken these words, to which Franz replied with a bow, than the door of the room opened, and Barrois appeared. "Gentlemen," he said, in a voice that was strangely firm for a servant speaking to his masters on such a solemn occasion, "Gentlemen, Monsieur Noirtier de Villefort wishes to speak immediately with Monsieur Franz de Quesnel, Baron d'Épinay." Like the notary, so that no one could be mistaken, he gave the fiancé his full title. Villefort started. Madame de Villefort let her son slip down from her knees, and Valentine got up, as pale and silent as a statue. Albert and Chateau Renard exchanged a second glance which was even more astonished than the first. The notary looked at Villefort. "Impossible," said the Crown Prosecutor. "In any event, Monsieur d'Épinay cannot leave the drawing-room at this moment." It is precisely at this moment that my master, Monsieur Nortier, wishes to speak of important matters with Monsieur Franz d'Epinay," said Barrois with equal firmness. "Is Grandpa Nortier talking now?" Edouard asked with his usual impertinence. But Madame de Villefort did not even laugh at this quip. So much was everyone preoccupied, and so solemn did the occasion seem. "Tell Monsieur Nortier that it is impossible to do as he asks," Villefort went on. "Then Monsieur Nortier would like to inform these gentlemen that he will have himself brought in person to the drawing-room," said Barrois. The astonishment reached its height. A sort of smile crept over Madame de Villefort's face. Valentine, as if involuntarily, looked towards the ceiling in gratitude to heaven. "Valentine," Villefort said, "please be so good as to go and find out what this new whim of your grandfather's is." She hurried towards the door, but then Monsieur de Villefort thought better of it and said, "Wait, I shall come with you." "Excuse me, monsieur," said Franz in his turn. "It seems to me that since I am the one whom Monsieur Nortier is asking to see, it is above all up to me to do as he wishes. In any case, I shall be happy to pay my respects, since I have not yet had the opportunity to request the favour of doing so." "Oh, come, come," said Villefort, clearly uneasy. "Don't put yourself out." "Excuse me, monsieur," Franz said in the voice of a man who had made up his mind. "I should not like to miss this opportunity to prove to Monsieur Nortier how wrong he would be to harbour any hostility towards me, and I am determined to overcome it, whatever the cause may be, by showing him my profound devotion." Without allowing Villefort to detain him any longer, Franz got up and followed Valentine, who was already going down the stairs with the joy of a drowning person whose hand has touched a rock. Monsieur de Villefort followed them. Chateau Renard and Morcerf exchanged a third look, which was even more astonished than the first two. And that is where we shall end for tonight.